Een hele goede avond allemaal. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are physically here present with us at the Bali. It's good to see you back in real life. But also welcome to those joining us via the live stream or watching the recording at a later time. Welcome to what is already the 32nd edition of the Freedom Lecture, hosted by the Bali, but with support of HAL, Jan Banning, Stichting Democratie in Media, and het V-Fonds. My name is Jamila Anzi, and I will be your moderator for tonight. And tonight we are very happy and very honored to have Susan Kigula in our midst to draw attention to a topic which may feel far from your bed. Well, at least my bed. I think most of the people in the audience have bought a ticket because they have specific interest in the topic. But for our guest, it has been a real-life experience, the death sentence. Not a light topic, like I mentioned, but therefore one that deserves our attention tonight and after tonight as well. What are we going to do this evening? We will start with an introduction of Jan Banning, photographer, artist, and close friend of Susan Kigula. Next up will be Susan's Freedom Lecture, and then we will have a panel with Jan Banning, lawyer and endowed professor in international law Geert-Jan Knoops, and research journalist and writer Linda Polman. Welcome once again. We look forward to the conversation we will be having after the Freedom Lecture and the panel discussion. There will also be some space and room for interaction with the audience. So if you have some questions or remarks, don't hesitate to then make use of that time. But first, I would like to give Jan Banning the floor and introduce our Freedom Lecture giver. Jan Banning.
Good evening. 10 years ago, in 2011, I started a project which resulted in a book and an exhibition called Law and Order, about criminal justice in 4 different countries: France, Colombia, the United States, and Uganda. And those countries were selected after consultations with several specialists of international law. And while preparing for my trip to Uganda, I started to read about criminal justice cases in that country, and I stumbled upon a very, very strange case of a young woman who had been convicted of murder and therefore automatically sentenced to death. Death was a mandatory sentence. If convicted for murder, you would get the death penalty. One of the things that struck me was that the crown witness was a 3-year-old boy. So I thought, let me get all the materials, the files, and delve into those, because I expect that to give an insight into the criminal justice system in Uganda. So I did. I went to the courts and to the High Court and the Supreme Court, and after a while I had a stack like, I think, about this size, and I read it all. And then, to my surprise, I was very easily given access to a lot of prisons in Uganda. And one of those was the women's prison. And as you can probably imagine, after reading so much about the case, but also the person, this young woman, I was interested to meet her. And I got permission to indeed see her when she was still on death row. And I had expected someone very, very serious and maybe a bit, well, let's say, emotionally heavy. And I got to meet her, obviously, as you will realize it was Susan. And I meet this bright and lively woman. So it was a beautiful meeting. And my main takeaway from the meeting, from her case, and from everything that happened afterwards, is that one individual, just one individual, can make a huge difference in life and can improve the lives of many other people. And I think that is just about what I want to say, because Susan should have the floor to tell her life story, in which this will also come across, I think. So Susan, please, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. I am Susan Kigula from Uganda. I spent 16 years in prison as a death row inmate. Yes, life can be so full of surprises. Because when I was growing up as a little girl, I was so much favored by my father among all my siblings. I was this intelligent, bubbly little girl, and we could always move together with my dad wherever he wanted to go. And one day he asked me, okay, Susan, what do you want to be in life, in the future? What are your aspirations? And because I had grown up in a poor family, a family that was struggling. My dad was a teacher, a primary school teacher, and my mom was a primary school teacher as well. They were not paid highly, of course. And I was seeing how both my parents were struggling with the 6 of us to make sure that we have food, we have clothing, and other basic needs. It actually touched me as a young girl. And then when Daddy asked me what I wanted to be, I just answered him excitedly, oh, Daddy, I want to be a banker. Because I thought everyone who works in a bank has access to the stack of money that is in the bank. So I wanted to give that much money, give to my dad so that he would be able to support us as a family. And he was like, okay. But he did not ask me why I wanted to be a banker. But that was my reason. And life continued. And then after some years went by, my dad was laid off work. And then it was only my mom who was the breadwinner of the family. I was 16 years old when I was called in the living room, and both my parents told me, Susan, look here, we know you're a very brilliant girl and you love your studies, but we are not able to continue with you in school because we want to also help your siblings, the young ones, to reach your level. But then I had only finished my ordinary level, left with my high school to go to university. It was really difficult for me to take in, but I understood the situation. And then that's how I dropped out of school. Not because I didn't want to study, not because of anything, but because we didn't have money to pay for our school fees. I went to the city to look for a job, and after some months, I got a job, and then I started working, earning some little money, which I could use to send back to home to support my family. Then when I was 18, I got pregnant, and then I had a baby girl. I was staying with the father of the baby. We were not married, but in Uganda, when you cohabit, they usually refer to it as, marriage. So the media called him my husband, and that's what picked up everywhere. And we were happy. We didn't have much. We were not rich, to be honest, but he loved me, and because I had grown up with this love of my dad, I really appreciated the love that was given to me, and so I didn't complain as a young girl. I didn't know much of what he used to do. Yeah, I didn't ask because he was way much older than me. But I was comfortable with the fact that you could at times bring food on the table. And then one day changed my life forever. We had dinner together and went to sleep as usual. And what woke me up in the night was a sharp object on my neck. When I woke up, a sticky, warm fluid was flowing down my neck. I was trying to check, then I ran out. To my surprise, the door was wide open. I ran out, I realized that blood was gushing out of my body, and then I fell down and I lost consciousness. They had cut me deeply on the neck, as you can see. My husband did not survive. He didn't make it to the hospital. In the morning, I was told that he died, and I survived narrowly. I was very weak. I could not walk on my own, except if I'm supported from both sides. After 3 days of his burial, one day my family were taking me to the hospital, and I got arrested. The police officers said, the family of the late alleging, you are the one who killed your husband. If not, why didn't you die too? I couldn't believe my ears. I was going through a lot of pain. I had lost the man I loved. I was in pain. I had so many questions. Who has done it? Why has he done it? Because we were not rich, and they did not take anything, nothing. They just came to take life. In that scuffle, my family were trying to refrain them from taking me, and the police officer was pulling me away, and my daughter was in between crying. It's such a horrible act that I remember. She was young. She didn't know what was going on. But she was crying and looking at the woman who was taking her away, her mother. And that's how I was separated from my daughter for 16 years. I stayed in the police cells for 2 months because the police were confused. How should we charge such a person? They deliberated. But of course, where there is a will for someone to take you to prison, with the corruption in our legal systems, I did not survive. I was taken to the court, and because it was a capital offense, I was not allowed to plead either guilty or innocent. And then I was taken to the prison. When I was growing up, I had believed that no one in prison, there is no one who is innocent. I knew that everyone who goes to prison must have committed a crime. I did not have any sympathy for prisoners. I didn't know much about the law. But that was my belief. I strongly believed that any innocent person can never go to prison because I believed in the judges. To me, I thought when I was growing up that these judges are like God. They can see through the lies and they don't make mistakes. And throughout those 2 years before I was produced for my trial, I still held on to that belief. I still held on to that trust that when I'm going to be produced before the judge for my trial, he will see through the lies and he will find me innocent. I did not worry much about whether I would be convicted because I knew I was innocent. After 2 years, I was taken to the judge. It was a high court judge, and my trial began. I didn't have a lawyer of my own because I didn't have the money to afford one. But the state provides all capital offenders with state briefs or state lawyers. And these lawyers, you meet them on the very day you're supposed to stand before the judge for your trial. They just allocate them files, and they can be having in one session about 5 to 10 files to expedite. And these are lawyers that are paid peanuts. They don't have time to do groundwork for a case. They don't have time to look for witnesses in support of your case because they want to get finished so that they are paid. And imagine the state, which is the prosecuting agency, gives you this lawyer, and this lawyer is going to be paid by the state. So one can think. But because for me, I didn't have money to afford my own lawyer, I had to oblige. And then when the trial started, witnesses came from nowhere. They were testifying against me. I was shocked. And finally, this little boy, all the evidence was circumstantial, but then it was actually weakening the case, but they realized that we are going to lose this case if we don't find something. So they brought this little boy. They had coached him. They sat him near the judge, and the little boy said, I saw how my father was being cut, and Susan cut my father. Just that. And this little boy was woken up that night of the murder. He was woken up in the morning by the neighbors who bathed him. He didn't know what happened. And a little boy, to be awake at 3 a.m. was also a question. I have nothing against this little boy. He was just a child. And I understand that he had no power to say no. Actually, he even did not know what to say. Because after he had grown, someone sent me a message that he regrets what he said. I've not met him though. And then on the judgment day, I was still very hopeful. Oh, Susan. I still had the faith that even if all that has been said, still I'm going to be set free. Because I still trusted in the legal justice system of my country. I trusted in the judge. And then the judgment was read, and the final verdict was Susan Kigula, this court finds you guilty of murder, and therefore I sentence you to suffer death by hanging. That is the form of execution Uganda has, death by hanging. it was like the world was crumbling on me. I went numb. I could not believe. I could not believe. I mean, I could not believe myself. Why? How? Thank you. Yeah. I felt betrayed by my own legal justice system. I thought about my daughter. She was so young. I thought about my parents, my dreams, my aspirations. Everything had come to an end. Sorry. I believed in God. I prayed to God for the truth to come out. But I felt like God was not there. And I was taken away to the death row section. And this time, I was to wait for my fate. When I arrived at the death row section, I met other women who had been sentenced to death, and most of them had not even gone to school. English is our official language. It is the language that is used in courts, and most of them had not even understood their court's proceedings. Majority of them were innocent, seriously. And the minority who were guilty had committed crimes of passion, or maybe defending themselves from abusive husbands who were repeatedly maybe raping them or battering them every day. And because they are women, they are not supposed to say anything. So in the end, in the course of defending themselves, they killed their husbands. But my analysis was nobody deserved to be on death row. I lived in anger, I lived in bitterness, I lived in resentment, until one day I got tired of that life. I mean, what was the point of getting angry with people who are not even here to see that I'm angry? And if I wallow into this self-pity for long, I may fall sick. And I didn't want that. I wanted to live for my daughter. I wanted my daughter to be proud of me one day. I knew I was not a criminal, so I said I'm not going to live like a criminal. And then I encouraged myself again in the Lord. I drew strength from my inner person. I hoped again. And then I decided to do something for myself and for other women. And that's when I started a school in prison, in which school I enrolled as a teacher, teaching my fellow peers, and then also studying as well. That is the prison I was incarcerated in. If Aaron can run the slides. And we had those different trees. So we made them our classes. Because we didn't have teachers, we didn't have classes. And then there was a lot of improvement. Women started learning English, learning how to read and write. And we took on formal education in the prison. I too studied for my advanced level because now I wanted so much to go to university level. Now I wanted it. I got an opportunity and I wanted to utilize the opportunity. After 2 years of my studying, I sat for the examinations same students sit for even outside prison in those prestigious schools, and I was among the best in the country. I couldn't believe myself. I was very happy, I was very excited. Yes, I have done something at least, yes. And now the media came to prison, and this time they were writing good about me. Susan the intelligent girl, Susan the promising girl, there is a genius in prison. And then, yeah, for the first time, they wrote good about me. And then we had McLean Alexander, I have him as my friend, and he's a British lawyer and magistrate who used to come in prison when he was still a student. He could come, encourage us, and set up a library, support the women who had babies from prison. And this time when he heard about it, because it really went viral, and he told me, Susan, I've come to see you, but there is some good news for you. Because this time I could not start a university. That was way too much for me. And he told me that I've managed to secure you a scholarship from the University of London. It's going to be a distant learning program. I was very, very excited, and I told him, okay, tell me, what discipline have they given me to study? And he told me, law. Huh. Not me. Not me. I told him, McLean, not me. I don't want to have to do anything with law. I hate law. I hate the lawyers. I hate the judges. I hate courts. I hate everything that is related to law. Please, it's a no. Because what the law had called justice, to me it was an injustice. He went back to England. After a while, he came back. And when he came back, DHL had shipped in books. I met him in the prison officer's office. So many boxes of books. He sat there, and my identity card from the University of London had been enrolled. Oh, I was very happy this time now. Things have worked out. So he told me, Susan, here I am. You're now a student enrolled. Okay, see your identity card, check it, and we're very excited. And then, told me, what subject am I going to study? He told me, law. I told him, McLean, maybe you did not understand me. He said, Susan, I understand your pain, and I know what you're going through. And I do believe there are other women who are going through what you're going through, not only here in Uganda, but all over the world. But I have seen what you've been able to achieve, not only for yourself, but for others in prison. If you study law, you're going to be able to help yourself and others like you, not only in Uganda, but all over the world. I was in prison on death row. How am I going to help people all over the world? But there is one sentence that struck me. He told me that you're going to bring a difference in your life and in the lives of others. I calmed down, I accepted, and started on my challenging journey of studying law from prison. The university itself was skeptical about whether a prisoner in prison on death row can study law. So they started me on a diploma level. And after 2 years of my studying under a tree, that is the court. Under a tree with no lecturers, I didn't have internet. I didn't know even how to use a computer. I didn't have one. I did my studies by reading, except the university sent me some lectures. They were brief on introduction of per topic that I had to go through. I read extensively. I had to understand all the legal concepts alone. I had no coursemate. I had nobody to exchange ideas with. But wherever McLean could come to visit, he would ask me how it was going. And at one time, I wanted out. I told him, no. McLean, I told you this is too complex. This is so very difficult. And he told me, Susan, if you have reached that level, then you're going to do it. Because he told me there is no lawyer, no magistrate or judge who has never gone through what you're going through. Like everyone who studies law reaches a point when they feel like, I can't take it anymore. But then they push on. And then I sat for my exams. And when they came back, they were shipped back to University of London, and I was among the best 30 students, including the on-campus students. The University of London is really big and has so many students. But Professor Jenny told me that you are among the first 30 best students. I couldn't believe myself. I was dedicated. It was because I committed myself. It was because I had self-discipline. I had self-sacrifice. It was so difficult. I was always discouraged. Some prison officers would ask me why I'm studying law, yet I'm going to be hanged. My fellow prisoners would just make noise, just to distract me, just to disorganize me. They would mock me. You're studying law for what? But I was determined. I closed my ears and I said, I will run this race alone and I will finish it. With the legal knowledge that I had acquired during my diploma level, I opened up a legal aid clinic, albeit informal in prison, and started helping my fellow inmates with their legal issues. They were too poor, they could not afford lawyers, but they needed some basic legal information to carry on. So I was able to write for them memorandums of appeal, their submissions, prepare their defenses, and then also take them through self-representation so that at least they could stand before a judge or a magistrate and explain themselves. I also helped to build their self-esteem. And there's so many getting their freedom. Others were sentenced to lesser sentences. They were living in prison. I was not jealous. I was very happy because I started to see the impact that my studies and my resilience was having on other people. The university extended the scholarship for me this time to study for a law degree because they were highly impressed by my performance. I continued to study, and in the due course, we were 417 other inmates on death row. We had no hope. All appeals were not helping. I started a choir in prison. We could sing songs concerning the death penalty, HIV, AIDS, church choir, But of course, my main aim was to send a message to reach out to the authorities. And we started receiving political figures coming in prison to see us. And wherever I could get an opportunity, I would talk and tell them about our plight and situation. Of course, I didn't see much changing, but then the message went out and other groups started mobilizing themselves to come to our support. And then we had these lawyers coming in to support us. It's a legal firm or a law firm. We had Foundation for Human Rights Initiative coming in and other pressure groups and other international groups. And then I led the petition. I led the case. I led 417 other prisoners in that petition against the death penalty, against mandatory death sentences, against the manner in which it is carried out by hanging, because one of our colleagues signed an affidavit and narrated to the court how when he was still the officer in charge, he witnessed hangings and executions. And he said sometimes people were very heavy that the rope could chop off their heads and the heads follow the other part and the blood gushes out, and then it went through the cells of these other prisoners who are on death row, and it was such a horrible sight. And then we were also saying mandatory death sentences were unconstitutional. All of us were sentenced under mandatory death sentences, whereby even if a woman had been defending herself from a rapist, the judge could not consider the circumstances of the commission of the crime. She would outrightly be sentenced to death. We went through a series of trials. The government put up a fight, sent its strongest lawyers against the prisoners. We won the case, the government appealed, and then we went again to the Supreme Constitutional Court. And then finally in 2009, final judgment came out. And mandatory death sentences were abolished in Uganda. They were declared unconstitutional. And all the 417 others that were on death row, the court held they had been unconstitutionally sentenced. However, the death penalty remained constitutional, and the judges guided the legislators on matters concerning the enaction of laws that could enable the death penalty to be scraped off from our law books. We still have the death penalty, but we no longer have mandatory death sentences. And the period, the long stay on death row before one is executed was a torture, was so cruel, it was so inhuman. Someone could stay on death row for more than 20 years, go through that death row syndrome, uncertainty of not knowing when they are coming to take me to the gallows. And after all that time, still you execute the person. And then courts held that in 3 years' time, if the government does not execute or pardon the offender, then that person would automatically be serving life imprisonment. It was a great achievement. The petition became very famous. It is now a precedent in other legal cases. Kenya used it as a precedent in its case against mandatory death sentences and the death penalty, and it was successful. The case has become a case study for all law students in Uganda. And it's cited in many other different countries. The laws of Uganda were changed in such a way. And all of us, most of us, were released automatically, and others went back for resentencing and then got our freedom. For now, out of the 417, there is no one on death row, except a few, because the judgment held that a death sentence could be given in the rarest of cases. So there are still some stubborn judges who feel like they get emotional and they sentence some people to death. But of course, most judges now know that they have the discretion to sentence to any other crime, any other sentence, any other custody sentence aside from the death penalty. And so I am happy to tell you that I also graduated later on with my law degree, and I'm now a lawyer. Thank you. I came out of prison in 2016, but unfortunately, I found when my mom and my dad both had died. They died. I didn't find them. But my daughter was still around. She was now 17 years by the time I came out of prison, a teenager, and we were very happy to be together again. Right now, I am involved myself in the struggle, in the fight, in the movement against the death penalty worldwide. When I was just 4 months after coming out of prison, I was invited in Norway, Oslo, and then I gave a presentation there. And since then, I've never looked back. I have traveled so many different countries speaking about or against the death penalty. And I want to implore all of us here, even if Holland doesn't have the death penalty, if you carry out an opinion poll today, you'll be surprised that majority want it back. But I want to tell you that we don't need the death penalty. Not now, not in the future. Because two wrongs don't make a right. And it has never proven that it is a deterrent to crime. No. And how about the innocent ones like me? You rather keep that person in prison, and later on, when that person gets exonerated, can go back in the society. Because you can get someone out of the prison, but not out of the grave. I am now supporting children of prisoners. I have an organization, Sunny African Children's Center. These children are left to nobody. My government doesn't have any policy that looks after those children. They are left homeless. They go on the streets. Some die in the process. They have nothing to eat. They have nobody to protect them. Some have been exposed to human trafficking. Some to child labor. Others have been sexually abused. Others are experiencing early pregnancies. Some die during labor because of the young or tender age. And others commit crimes and they go back. They go to prison and they find their parents in prison. I do believe that these children, they have a right to live like normal children. They don't have to pay for what their parents did. They should not pay for their parents' mistakes. And so this is where my passion came from, to take care of them. I work with a cohort of lawyers. We work in Kenya and Uganda prisons. We help educate and equip prisoners and prison staff with basic legal information that they can pass on to other poor prisoners who cannot afford lawyers, so that they may be able to defend themselves in courts. I also support women who are in prison for more than 10, 20 years in their rehabilitation and in their reintegration back to society, because it is always difficult for a woman to stabilize in society after being away for so long. Some are taken advantage of, and because we want to break the cycle of recidivism, I am there to give them a shoulder. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Susan. That is, well, some life experience you have lived through. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your life story with us. I would like to ask you to come join me at the table to see if there are any questions or remarks for you from the audience. And grab your water with you so you can take a sip and take a deep breath before we go to the questions. You said yourself that you've been doing presentations for a couple of years now and sharing your life story. I mean, does it become easier, or do you have to pump up yourself every time you're in front of the audience?
Am I on?
I think you're on, yes.
Thank you very much. There is nothing like pumping myself, because this is a life that I have lived. Mm-hmm. I only draw inside myself and pull out that life and talk about it. It's not easy, yes, because it brings back memories, mm-hmm. and it's really very emotional. But because I want my story to impact in the lives of other people in a positive way, I am happy to do it. Yeah.
And we're happy that you're here doing it. You've been in the Netherlands for a couple of days now. You were, I think, in France before the Netherlands. I wanted to ask you about back home, Uganda. How is life there now with the pandemic? I mean, we've all been struggling all around the world, but how was it for you in Uganda?
In Uganda, economically, we are also affected, because unlike other European countries where governments could give subsidies to their citizens, it was not the case in Uganda, and up to now, we are still under partial lockdown. Yes. So it's been really very hard on all of us. Yeah, the fact that so many people no longer go to work, so many businesses crumbled down, so economically we are badly hit. But we're very grateful, because right now we're having a stabilized COVID situation now in Uganda.
That's good.
Though the public are getting through the vaccination processes, but we're happy to tell the world that we're having an infection rate of 1 to 2% now.
Thank you for sharing a little bit about how Uganda is doing, and all the best wishes. I'm looking at Sophie, who has a mic in her hand, and she's going to look into the audience to see if someone has a question or a comment for our guests tonight before we move on to the panel conversation. Yes, please.
With the enormous strength you have, and being able to, although you suffered yourself, being able to help other people on the way. It's amazing. In our firm, we help a lot of people who are suffering from a miscarriage of justice, but most of them have a post-traumatic stress syndrome, are very busy with themselves, and need to be assisted in getting out of it. When I listen to you, you have an amazing story. I compliment you for it. And it is amazing that while you suffered yourself so much, you were able to help other people and study on the side. I compliment you. It's an amazing story.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I'm humbled.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm wondering if anything changed in the quality of the defense that people get now in Uganda.
Thank you very much. Yes, something changed, because right now, even if one is found guilty of a capital offense, it's no longer automatic that he or she is going to receive a death sentence, unlike before when mandatory death sentences were still operating. Thank you.
Do they also get better lawyers now?
Better lawyers, except if you have money to pay for your own lawyer. That cycle still goes on. Yeah. If you want a better lawyer, you have to pay. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, one over there, Sophie.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was in Zambia on visited a death row in prison to see what they do with psychiatric patients there. And we noticed that on death row, nobody actually was executed. That had some reason, I don't know exactly why, but how is that in Uganda? How often is the death conviction also executed?
Actually, I beg your pardon. I was trying to follow you up, but I lost you when you said that death row prisoners in Zambia are doing what? Anyone understood the question?
I'm sorry, can I assist? The question was...
Maybe you can, yes.
Yes.
Go has been in Zambia, and there people were on death row, but the death penalty was not executed often.
They have not been executed.
Not even at all. So he asks how the situation in Uganda was.
Okay, thank you very much, Franz, for that interpretation. That death, we have so far 123 death row inmates in Uganda, and only 8 have exhausted their appellate courts. And so those 8, within 3 years, if they are not executed, they are going to be automatically transferred to serve life imprisonment. And I don't know. I don't know whether I have answered your question. But
Was that an answer to your question?
have I answered your question?
Well,
Just a second.
not exactly, but I understand that it is rather difficult are people really executed?
Pardon me. Maybe you are asking whether Uganda has had any executions in the long run, right? Okay, Uganda has not had executions for close to 10 years now, and that gives us hope. Yeah, thank you.
The death penalty is still in the law, but they don't carry it out anymore, right?
You can't rule out that they will not carry them out, because before even I left my country, the president hinted on it and he said, for us, we want the death penalty. So that means that those on death row are living in fear, because if the state doesn't have the will to remove the death penalty, even the legislators, the members of parliament, most of whom are in the ruling party, they have to go by what the president has to say. So you can't rule out that it will not be carried out, but it has not been carried out. But anything can happen.
Thank you. I think, Jan, you wanted to add something, right? Or is it enough said? Okay, thank you. Anyone else with a question or remark for Susan? We have one over there, Sophie.
I was wondering, while you were studying in prison, you told us that you were prevented to study by your fellow lady prisoners. But as going along, weren't you at the same moment a source of inspiration for them, that afterwards they started to study as well, and they maybe spread the word as well?
Yes, thank you. I would want to give you a scenery. As you have seen, our prisons, oh, this is just one of the offices. Yan. Okay.
This one? This is where you're studying, right? Or
yes.
Where, yeah.
In prison, there are so many women. We are more than 500 women. A few of them embraced at first the opportunity of studying, and there are those stubborn ones who did not want to. And yeah, after my first graduation, they felt inspired. Yeah, even those who were against it felt inspired. And by the time I came out of prison, the government had taken over the school, and so many had enrolled in that school. And right now, many are now at university level, and many have taken up legal studies as well. So afterwards, they saw, and they saw what I had achieved, and they were inspired, yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for all the questions and remarks. The first comment was a compliment, and I think we all share that compliment for your strength and helping others and sharing your story. I read in an interview you gave yesterday, I think in the NRC, that you are being recognized back home by men and women who were sentenced to death row, and they recognize you and lift you up and thank you and consider you to be a hero. Now, do you consider yourself to be a hero? For all the remarkable things you've done and still do.
I don't consider myself as a hero, but I'm so proud of myself.
Very. Thank you so much, Susan, and please stay with us. We will be moving on to the panel conversation, and but before that, I would like to ask Linda Polman, research journalist and writer, on stage to read us an extract from Death Row Dollies, her novel about the death row industry in Texas.
Let me take some water, please.
Please do. Build up the suspense. There you go. Linda Polman.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I must compliment you again. Your story was breathtaking, and your achievements are quite remarkable. So thank you very much for this wonderful story that you shared with us. I would also want you to go to Texas, because in Texas they have maybe exact the same problems as you experienced, and they need you there to help them. Let me explain to you that in the United States, I will read a little bit from my book. It's called Death Row Dollies. It's a book about European women who start relationships with death row inmates in Texas, in the United States. And through the stories of these women, I dived into the world of death row. I dived into the world of people that defend death row inmates. I dived in the world of the anti-death penalty movement in Texas. And so I learned a lot about the death penalty in the United States. I will read you a little bit from this book about the defense. And your story, Susan, rang a lot of bells. In the United States of America, not the worst murderers get the death penalties, but those with the worst lawyers. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who we all know, who before she died a couple of years ago was a judge in the US Supreme Court, always said that it is very simple in America. People with good lawyers do not get the death penalty. She said that in the dozens of cases that are seen by the Supreme Court, I still have to come across the first of an offender who was properly defended. If you are poor, the court will appoint you a lawyer, just like in Uganda. These court-appointed lawyers earn an average of less than $1 per hour, and they get very small budgets to prepare a case and investigate. Prosecutors, however, get all the money they need for expensive investigators and experts. Because court-appointed lawyers rarely can win, their motivation is often hard to find, and there are, with few exceptions, no high flyers in the trade. Amnesty International documented numerous cases wherein lazy, unprepared and unwilling defense counselors totally neglected their responsibilities to their clients and presented very little or no evidence or just one witness. Take the case against George McFarland, for example. He was condemned for the robbery and murder of a shop owner in small-town Texas. His lawyer sat snoring loudly, snurken in the courtroom. The lawyer was court-appointed because McFarland could not afford a private lawyer. The lawyer's head would fall backwards, his mouth wide open, and continuously he would startle wide awake, hoist himself up and doze off again and again and again. In an explanation, the lawyer said later, "I am 72 years old. I always nap in the afternoons." McFarland appealed on basis of inadequate defense, but the appeals judge concluded that the Constitution of America says that one has a right to a lawyer, but it does not mention that a lawyer should be awake. During the court case against Calvin Burdeen, his lawyer was also sleeping peacefully, chin on his chest, and therefore he said nothing when the prosecutor pleaded for the death penalty and not life imprisonment, because Burdeen was gay. For homosexuals, prison is no punishment, the prosecutor said, but rather a party, a picnic. For 18 years, Burdeen fought to have his case reviewed. Finally, he was allowed a new trial that resulted in a life sentence. In the 18 years, he was dragged 6 times from death row to the execution chamber to receive his lethal injection. Each time he was granted a last-minute stay. The prosecutor in his case reminded the court that in America, courts had all seen it before. Lawyers who were drunk, who were stoned, or confused or unprepared, and lawyers with Alzheimer's. But never had it been caused to change a sentence, so why would it be any different with a sleeping lawyer? No one objected to the lawyer who called his client a stupid nigger son of a bitch, except for the client himself who wanted a new lawyer. The judge, however, rejected the demand and the jury sentenced him to death. And it's anyone's guess what the strategy was of the lawyer who said in his plea to the jury that you've seen with your own eyes what a pathetic, empty, purposeless, blubbering creature my client is. The blubbering creature was sentenced to death. There have been lawyers who never asked to see the files of their clients and who missed the deadlines for appeals or file appeals with the wrong court. In all these instances, it resulted in a death sentence. And there are also the mentally ill who are sent to death row. They cannot afford a proper medical test. Somewhere in the deepest depth of death row's dungeons, a man has survived since 1976. He is still alive today. His name is Raymond Riles. He's been there for 45 years on death row, longer than anyone else in America. When I asked to see him, the warden had never heard his name before. Nobody ever asked about Raymond, not family, no friends, no journalist. Raymond had killed a second-hand car dealer after they had an argument about a car in 1974. 3 times he got an execution date. Each time he received a last-minute stay because the Supreme Court found him mentally ill and therefore unfit for execution. Raymond has got mad after 45 years on death row. I asked him, and he does not comprehend where he is or why he deserves to be executed. But they keep him on death row anyway because he may recover and then he can be executed. Death rows in the United States are full of mentally ill people. Experts believe that just about 100% of them, of all death row inmates in the US, suffer from trauma due to maltreatment and sexual violence from when they were children. I have seen the miserable details in many files of death row inmates. Bobby Moore, for example, his mother had the habit of hoisting her son up by chains on his ankles and then horsewhipping him. Stephen Staley's mother tried hammering a wooden stake through his heart. The mother of Michael Toney brought boyfriends home. One such lover tied Michael to a chair and set his hands on fire. It did not make a difference in court. He got the death penalty. They were raped by their fathers, grandfathers, brothers and neighbors, hit on the head with an iron or a hammer, set on fire, roasted on hot stoves, and they were starved. You can't make up what grown-ups have actually done to most of them, but they were still children. The Supreme Court in 2012 ruled that the mentally ill cannot be executed, but most states execute them anyway because it is left up to the states themselves to decide what mentally ill means. Ricky Rector was brain damaged. He first committed his murder and then he shot himself through the head. He was executed. For his last meal, he asked for a steak and a slice of pecan pie. He did not eat the pie because he wanted to save it for later. We often hear that the death penalty in the United States is riddled with racism. It is true that there are more black people than whites on death rows, but I believe it is much more a matter of poverty and inequality. There is not one millionaire to be found on death row. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and please join us at the table, and thank you for giving us an insight into this world of death row dollies. We have about 25 minutes left for the after talk, and for that I would like to invite back Jan Bunning to join us at the table. Welcome. And lawyer and endowed professor of international law at the University of Amsterdam, Geert-Jan Knoops, if you could join us at the table. Welcome, everyone. First off, we have been watching your pictures, right, Jan, behind us. Could you maybe tell us a few words about the pictures you took, that you brought with us, that you brought with you?
Well, they are the result from two different trips I made to Uganda. I recently, I talked about the first one, which was quite a short trip. Mm-hmm. And then to elaborate and to make more, I went back for, I think, several weeks. Well, I got this permission, as I think I indicated earlier, rather easily. Mm-hmm. Much easier, in fact, than in the other three countries that I mentioned, where it took me like 1.5 years, 2 years, whereas in Uganda it was like an hour. It basically only took me to meet the General Commissioner of Prisons, who Susan is very familiar with. Mm-hmm. And it struck me, the contrast with these other countries. This Commissioner of Prisons, I think if you want to tell, if we need to know more about him, you should tell them because you know him much better. I can just give my first impression, which is that he just sat there and basically told me, well, how many prisons do you want to go to? Yeah. And go ahead. And in fact, in one prison, they were trying to stop me from making photographs, and by coincidence, he was there. Oh. And he told them to shut up and let me do my work.
Let the man take his picture.
So I think this man is kind of a unique figure in the whole situation. But then again, let me not talk about things that you know much more about.
Yeah, well, it's a nice way of accompanying your story by having those pictures of the actual place you've spent so many years at. So thank you for bringing them.
Well, and maybe one thing I could add is that what Susan confirmed when I discussed that with her later, that it struck me that the relationship between prisoners and guards and personnel in Uganda was so much nicer than what I had seen, well, probably in all other countries. Maybe France would be the exception, but certainly in the US and in Colombia. Yeah. And so I would walk through a prison there, and the director would accompany me, and he would be patting people on the back and having a nice chat. And in the beginning, I thought this is like a public relations exercise. But even then, in the countryside, where I don't think there was much idea of public relations, it was kind of the same thing. So before I started this whole project, when looking at these 4 countries, I thought, well, okay, my guess would be France is probably the most humane. Then, in spite of the little I knew about it, probably the US, and then somewhere down there, Uganda and Colombia. And it turns out that this is kind of a prejudice. Not saying that it's, well, as Susan has clearly described, it's not exactly a party to be in prison in Uganda, but in some aspects, the situation in the US, not to mention Colombia, is far worse.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing that you had several countries that you could compare the situation with. I want to go to Mr. Knoops. Thank you for joining us this evening. First off, how have you been listening to Suzanne's story, and what parts were striking to you as a lawyer, as a human being?
Well, it's unfortunately the story of Mrs. Kigula is recognizable, because there are still many, many people around the world in the same situation. We are recently been involved in a case in Texas, a death row case of a young boy, Clifton Young, who is now, in September, the Court of Appeal in Texas reversed his death row penalty. And you see the same phenomenon, that people who are ill-represented are the victim, what Ms. Polman rightly said, of the system. So it's admirable that you, Mrs. Kigula, have the strength to start again with your life, so to speak. In the case I just mentioned, it's really, you think we're living in 2021, but still there are law systems in the world where it seems that time has not actually lived up with the principle of humanity. Actually, there are 2, I think, very principal elements of the death penalty. First of all, the discussion, is it in compliance with principles of humanity? We see at the international criminal tribunals, where I predominantly work, death penalty is not allowed, it's excluded. Even in the tribunal of Cambodia, where the responsible individuals of the Khmer Rouge regime were tried for genocide, there's no death penalty allowed. At the International Criminal Court where I work, there's no death penalty, and still the gravest offenses in the world, genocide, crimes against humanity, are being tried there. And secondly, somebody who is innocent like you is actually taken away from a chance to prove your innocence. That's, I think, the irreversible nature of death penalty. And the people who still advocate for death penalty, there are still politicians also in Europe who advocate for death penalty, they don't realize that a judgment, a legal judgment, still can be wrong. You should always open the possibility that there is some kind of redress. In the United States, where we work with the Innocence Project, we have a Dutch law firm, we are integrated in the United States Innocence Network. In the last 20 years, there are more than 380 people exonerated based on new DNA evidence. And these people were convicted based on confessions, on eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and it all turned out to be wrong. So can you imagine if all those people were executed, these people would not have had a chance to prove their innocence. Yeah. So that is my response to your lecture, and I think governments like your government should actually be educated by people like you. And it has to start at law schools, it has to start with the education of judges, prosecutors, because they have no idea sometimes what the irreparable damage is to be done by the death penalty.
But I'm sure we were talking about the US and especially Texas.
Yes.
We have a recent case with you. I'm sure they know that as well. And like you said, it is 2021, and the US is one of the last Western countries who still carries out the penalty.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you explain this position of the United States?
Well, if you look at the United States, I think the majority of the states have now abolished the death penalty. There are still a few states which have the statutory death penalty. I think it has to do also with, of course, and Mrs. Pullman can, I think, better explain it because of her research. But for instance, the case we are now dealing with in Texas, this Clifton Young was convicted in a small town, Midland, whereby there was one judge, politically elected, so he had to, of course, have his position reinstated by the elections, and a prosecutor who had the same position, because those positions were politically chosen. And the judge and the prosecutor, they worked together. The prosecutor was the consultant of the judge in his free time, and he was paid by the judge for consultancy while the case was pending. And the prosecutor, when the case was still pending against Clifton Young, wrote several judgments, draft judgments, decisions, which the judge took over. And this was only revealed after several years. So an answer to the question why, I think it's because one still thinks in certain states, United States, that by imposing the death penalty, it will impress the population, because the population wants to have the death penalty to a certain extent. If there is a horrible crime committed, the first thing you hear of people is that person should hang, symbolically, of course, because hanging is not the execution form in the United States anymore. But there is still a huge, I think, perception that the death penalty will deter people from committing crime. But what you said in your lecture, it's never been proven. There's no empirical proof that death penalty will deter people from committing crimes. 3 years ago, I interviewed John Grisham, the famous thriller writer. He was in the he came to the Netherlands for his book presentation, his last book, also dedicated to the Innocence Project. And I asked him the same question: why are still states, United States, there, which have the death penalty? He said it's a cultural issue still in certain states, and the only way to have the death penalty abolished in its totality is a form of education of the people. Wow. And that's why I think the lecture which you gave is so important. And indeed, what Ms. Pullman said, you should go to Texas with your lecture as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
Linda, is Texas different from the other states in the U.S.? Because you've done a lot of research for your book.
It's especially the southern United States.
Yeah. Yes, southern states.
Texas, Georgia, places like that, who really love their death penalty. And it's a matter of culture. It's also a matter of the Bible. They believe that God wants murderers to die. In Texas, they say, if you murder somebody, we murder you back. And it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And churches preach the death penalty. So it is definitely a cultural thing. And the only way it can change, if those states modernize, they have to lose the Bible more. They have to let go of the Bible. So it is a biblical punishment to be sentenced to death.
Yes, and I think the political, and it's maybe in Uganda the same, there is in those states where you see the death penalty being imposed, there is, in most of those systems, there is a close connection between judiciary and the prosecution service. And I think one of the biggest problems in the United States, in states where the death penalty is, that the judges there and the prosecutors, they need the votes of the people to remain in their position. And that has to change.
Well, there's a big hope for America. America is not only 54 states or something, but it's also divided into counties. Mm-hmm. And all counties can have a prosecutor who will either ask for the death penalty or not. Mm-hmm. So in the United States, there's a very limited amount of counties where the death penalty is actually demanded and where the death penalty is actually executed. So as the death penalty movement often targets only those counties, not countries, but counties. You know, provinces, yes. So in a way, I'm hopeful that if you have, I believe there are more 400 counties in the United States, and in about 80 of them, they actually ask for the death penalty and they execute people. So if you target those 80 counties, then it all becomes bearable or something. It all becomes something that we can all oversee. You only need to target 80 counties. Yeah. So there is hope for America. You don't actually have to target all of Texas, no. But you only have to target those few counties that execute people.
Let me add to that of course these are the rich counties because it's so expensive.
It's very expensive to ask
a
for
death
the death penalty. Yes.
Case that these small counties can't even afford it.
Susan, how have you been listening to the Texas version of death row? And do you recognize it, was it in Uganda also the case of being both political and biblical, the need to have a death penalty?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have listened to both, and my analysis is we don't have to do away with the Bible. Maybe we interpret the Bible differently, because people who claim an eye for an eye, and they claim that it is biblical, it is the same Bible in the New Testament that still says, forgive. Punishment is not for you, it's for me, the Lord. So I think we need also to highlight that to them so that they don't have that excuse. And also actually against what most people say, an eye for an eye. And in an instance where one rapes, do you rape that person back? Because also rape is a capital offense that carries a death penalty. And so those are some of the grounds or ideas that we have to bring up when we're trying to educate the public, the judiciary, the prosecutors, the political figures about the death penalty, because I do believe that they are ignorantly trying to get away with their opinions, yet it is not everyone's opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move from Texas to Uganda to the Netherlands and the Antilles, Mr.
Yes,
Knoops.
and excuse me, you asked me also whether politically I do believe what Council said. And yeah, usually countries that have the death penalty most of the time use it for political reasons, because they want to have this scarecrow for their political opponents. And we do believe, just like I said, if a country has a will to abolish the death penalty, it starts with the political leaders. So it is very imperative that we educate these political leaders, but also having access to them is a question. Yeah, but we have to keep on pressing. Thank you.
Thank you for that addition. That's a very important one. Mr. Knoops, you mentioned the Innocence Project already, and you work on it for wrongfully convicted people in the Netherlands and the former Antilles. What kind of cases do you encounter there, and what is your assistance that you can provide for those people?
Well, in the last 20 years, we were able to exonerate only in the Netherlands 8 people who were convicted till very long sentences for murder, rape. Mostly, and that's very peculiar, that most of the cases who apply for review by the Innocence Project are people who are convicted for long sentences. Mm-hmm. And the main causes of miscarriage of justice in the Netherlands, actually also in Europe, are comparable to those in the United States, what one would not expect is that the misinterpretation of DNA evidence is one of the major causes of miscarriage of justice, wrongful application of forensic evidence, misidentification of witnesses, and confessions. United States, that's almost 25% of the exonerations by the US Innocence Project. Those causes, the cases we have done so far, and we have now 25 cases in our system, which all have to be reviewed by people of our law firm. You will see the same causes as the United States. And actually, I think, to speak about the role of lawyers, I think lawyers have their own responsibility, not only to criticize the system, but I work in a commercial law firm. Mm-hmm. So I have to earn my living. But we have decided as a commercial law firm that 20, 25, almost 30% of our work is pro bono. And I think if all law firms, also in the United States, would say as a principle, we know that there is so much injustice out there, there's so much miscarriage of justice still ongoing. If every law firm, even commercial law firms, would lend some of the lawyers for a pro bono basis also to death penalty cases, we wouldn't have lawyers sitting there in the courtroom snoring. We wouldn't have lawyers who would have, at the day of the death penalty case, get a file like what you explained to us. That is absolutely scandalous. So I think also the advocacy, our professional branch should actually move forward. And that's the idea of the Innocence Project. We have now set up in Europe also a European Innocence Network, whereby we try to establish in every European state a similar Innocence Project. And it's a matter of also outreaching to the governments. We are not sponsored by our government. Our government is not sponsoring our project, so we are depending on donations for forensic evidence. Of the 25 cases we are now researching in the Netherlands, there are now 4 or 5 who are eligible for a review by the Supreme Court. And this is the work we do, apart from our normal criminal law defense work. And this is part of a certain philosophy that you have to contribute also to society. And there are so many people who need good legal representation. And that's why this Innocence Project is so important. And it is so important that also in Uganda, in all those states where you have law systems who do not comply with due process rights, that lawyers also stand up and take their own responsibility.
Is it mandatory for Dutch lawyers to do pro bono work? No.
That is the point. There is no mandatory rule or obligation. The case I just brought this...
the Texas one, right?
Texas one. The 22nd September, the Criminal Appeals Court in Texas gave a new trial to our client Clifton Young. And in this case, we work with a group of lawyers, also commercial lawyers, because we believe in innocence. And it's not about money anymore. It's about principle. So there is still a chance for justice also in the United States, not only by criticizing the system, but also the lawyers themselves should stand up. Yeah. And actually, and that's why I think it's very important that people like you, Ms. Kigula, will also spread the word that not only it's very easy to criticize the system and that things are going wrong.
You can actually do something.
But we, lawyers, we are part of the system.
Yeah. And now you're part of the Innocence Project. And Susan, you're an ambassador of the charity Justice Defenders. So you both are trying to do your own part in this struggle. Well, but what more can be done? What is needed to make some bigger steps towards abolishing the death penalty? Not only in Uganda or in the US, but worldwide. And maybe you can all just short answer before we continue.
Thank you very much. What I think that can be done is that everyone should take responsibility and know that we are all together in this struggle, this movement. You don't have to wait for a relative to be sentenced to death or yourself, we should all raise up. Our voices all matter. Yeah, briefly.
Thank you. Jan, what do you think needs to be done to take some bigger steps?
I guess I agree with Susan. As you put it earlier, we have to roll up our sleeves and get dirty, right? That's what you said, and basically that's what you also said, applying to lawyers. But I think this is kind of a general thing. This is not just about death penalty, but about, well, if we want to accomplish any change, I guess we have to start doing something instead of waiting, and that's, of course, what you have done clearly. And I think what you just described is also an excellent initiative.
Linda?
Well, I decided to be positive today.
Yes, please.
How do you do that, Linda?
It's new. Well, this year in the United States, only 5 people were executed. Just 5, you know, it's nothing. So, and there have
that
been
anything to do with the pandemic, or?
No. It's just that people. There's lots of states at this moment. This is something that the European Union did good. You know, one thing they did good was that in 2012 they forbade the export of one of the components of lethal injections to the United States. If that component was being used for executions, the European Union forbade it. So, and that disrupted the death penalty a lot in the United States, because suddenly there are nice little schemes and there are nice little protocols inside death rows were very much disturbed because they just ran out of poison to execute people. So it took them several years to recuperate from that, because they had to find new poisons to use on prisoners, and then judges would not agree to that, or the FDA, the federal Department of, well, anyway, the food department that has to approve medicines, etc. They did not agree, so they had to cancel executions, they had to postpone executions. Several states even abandoned the death penalty, or they did not, they still have the death penalty, but they don't execute people anymore. So it disrupted a lot. And I believe they've still not recovered from that disruptions. So this is something that we could do more often from Europe. Work on better innocence projects. Work on things like this. You know, refuse to export stuff that they use in prisons in America.
Because this was a question of supply, and if you don't supply them with.
Well,
they need to execute the death row penalty.
And then they have to find new stuff. And some states never found new stuff. So yes, this was an excellent little measure out of the European Union. So I'm positive that in the United States, maybe in 10 years or in 20 years, the death penalty will die out. It will just wither away. It may still exist in the laws, but people will be less and less executed in the United States.
Do you agree? 10 to 20 years?
For.
Yes, but I think there's a very important lesson we learned from our Innocence Project is that we lawyers, we are not politicians. But for instance, like election like this, I'm sure there's no politician in the audience here, or anyone? No minister?
Or we just don't recognize them.
Okay, maybe incognito. But we should, as lawyers, speaking about these initiatives, involve politicians more and more. Give you one example. The director of my project, she's sitting here in the front row, Mrs. Carrie Knoopshamburger. She already for 7 years speaking to the Dutch government. There should be a financial fund to finance forensic investigation for people who claim to be innocent and they have no money, they have no finances to ask the Supreme Court to reopen the case. Because you cannot just go to the Supreme Court and say, look, I'm innocent, give me a new trial. You have to present new evidence. How to get new evidence? That is the tougher thing for a lawyer in our profession. So for new evidence, you need new investigation, and most likely new experts, new investigation methods arise, etc. After 7 years speaking to politicians, being invited into parliament, now for the first time this year, our Minister of Justice is on the verge of allowing a pilot to donate a certain amount of money, tax money, in a fund, which has to be governed by an independent organ, whereby the lawyers who do review cases can apply for financial aid to do their investigation. It took us 7 years.
Wow.
That's to say that the only way to change somebody in their mind and death penalty is involve the politicians, explain to them, give presentations, give the data of the exonerations, why exonerations are there.
And keep doing that, because it's...
Keep doing this.
I mean, 7 years, it's
And
long term.
Even though it takes years, it will change. And what Ms. Polman said, I'm sure if lawyers are being proactive also on the political front, what we do with the Innocence Project, time will change. It takes a lot of time. It took the United States mostly 20 years. Now most of the projects there in the States are being financed by the federal government. There are huge donations by private institutions in the United States, sometimes millions, whereby the Innocence Project can do the research. It takes time, but we shouldn't be shy to involve the politicians also in our work. That's the only way to change the world. Yeah. And even the Ugandan government, I think if they would have listened to your presentation, there would be one politician would say, maybe we have to change our system.
And you need the one, the first.
You need just one.
You need the first one.
You need just one.
Yes. We're already running out of time. I just want to see if there's 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Because at some point we'll be moving the conversation towards the bar. Yes, please. Wait for the microphone to add something.
The only thing that I would like to add is Oscar Wilde has, in one of his books, ever said, you have no idea how much you can suffer if it is the pain of somebody else. Which means that, you know, as long as we have no clue what happens to the people who are convicted wrongly, we think, as Mrs. Kigula said, we all think that if people are convicted, they're criminals. We have no idea. So I think one of the most important things in order to change is that people like Mrs. Kigula is going out, which she's already doing, and speaking to the people. She should also be invited by people of government, also by people of the prosecution. Because if the prosecution does its work properly, they should have, in your case, should have known that you were innocent. So it's not only the lawyers that should do their work properly, it's also the office of the prosecution that does its work, that needs to do its work properly. And the judges who have to realize that if somebody says, I did it, it might also be wrong. False confessions. It just happens. And that's why I think people like Mrs. Kigula, who experienced it herself, who can express it so emotionally well, she should go out and teach the world. And I'm sure once people are touched by her story and touched by what really happens to these people, that also might help change the world and realize death penalty is the wrongest thing you can do. Should not happen.
There's, by the way, an interesting phenomenon now set up in the United States, and that's also an example how it could be, how it should be. In the United States, since a few years, some prosecutors have realized that there are convictions who are very dubious. So they have set up so-called conviction investigation units. That means that the prosecution and defense start working together in files where there was always some type of doubt, but still there was a conviction. And we have experienced one case in the Caribbean where we worked closely together with the prosecution service and the prosecution team in a double homicide case where 2 boys were convicted for a double homicide in the Caribbean, and they were convicted up to the Supreme Court, but they claimed to be innocent. We took the case, we investigated the case with former police investigators. We were able to have an interlocutory decision of the Court of Appeal to start a new investigation, and then we start to work together with the prosecution. We shared our knowledge with that of the prosecution team, and we both came to the conclusion, this is a miscarriage of justice. It was quite unique. So the recipe could also be that defense and prosecution in those cases should more work together. That's now starting in the United States. Those conviction investigation units have already been exonerated dozens of people in the United States who were convicted till life and even to death penalty. And I think that idea should also be implemented maybe by other states.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, well, of course, the problem there is what you just mentioned, the fact that the prosecutors, the judges are being elected, the sheriffs are being elected. So you need a prosecutor with balls to do that.
Yeah.
But even in that, you just need the first one.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are some.
Yeah. In the beginning, there was some skepticism about these units, but now you see it growing in the States, and I'm not sure whether that will work in Texas, but you have to start somewhere.
I think we can talk for hours about Texas, but we are already like 15 minutes beyond the time we had for this program. I didn't see any more hands from the audience, but if you do have questions or remarks, like I said, we will be moving this conversation towards the bar. I will be giving Susan the final word, but before I do that, I would like to thank you, Mr. Knoops, for being here and joining us, and for all the work you do on the Innocence Project together with your partner in crime. Thank you. Linda Pullman, thank you for being here with us. Is your book still available, Death Row Dollies? It is, Death Row Dollies, go and get it. Jan Bunning, thank you so much for not only being here, but also helping organize this evening. Thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. And if I may add one thing, now that there's some talk about books.
Yes, you have a book too.
On January 15, my book will come out, a photo and text book.
With the pictures, or?
Nope.
No?
About the case of an American woman who has been locked up for almost 30 years and who is clearly innocent.
January 15th.
January 15th in the Photo Museum in Rotterdam. And the book is called The Verdict, or in Dutch, Het Oordeel.
The Verdict. Thank you. Jan Bunning. Yeah. Suzanne, how have you been? How have you been listening to everything from Texas to the Netherlands to Uganda?
Thank you. Through listening to everybody and to the different countries where the death penalty is still applied, I have realized that we truly have some cultural differences in the application of the death penalty. And I was actually listening in Awe when he was saying that the Innocent Project is able to reach out even to those innocently sentenced in other countries like the Caribbean, like Texas, yeah. And I'm just wondering how they do it, because in my country, just like discussed, the government or the president is the appointing authority of the judges and probably the prosecutors. And if that was to happen to my country, which I highly doubt, that means that the judges have to put their lives at stake or their jobs at stake, because they are not independent. They cannot be, even if one has his or her own opinion and belief, they are not actually independently exercising what they believe in, just because of the fact that they don't want to lose their jobs, and also they're fearing for their families, which I do believe that in other countries maybe it may be different or anything, but I would implore all those who could connect me or connect us to other political leaders, because I do believe, just like you've heard, that it can start with one person. I do believe that even if I am alone now, where together we'll be three and we'll be a crowd. But once you're doing the right thing, I know that everyone will appreciate what you do. So we have a task of reaching out to the political leaders in the different countries, and some people have access to the political leaders, and just like she has said that if at all I'm able to speak to some political figures, maybe they could change their mind. And those political figures, I know they do meet at one time or the other in different conventions with political leaders in my country. They can still share with them. Yeah, it is not very easy for me in my country, basing on our political situation right now. But I would implore anyone who could get me close to political leaders of countries that are still retentionists, that still have the death penalty. I'll be very happy to share my story. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. Thank you.
That is a very clear call to action, and access is so important to get things done. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. We will be following you and wishing you good luck on the rest of your journey. Ladies and gentlemen, Susan Kigula.